When Mushoku Tensei first came around, I'll admit that I wasn't actually planning on watching it. The synopsis for the series genuinely doesn't sound very interesting in the current isekai-saturated anime market, and had it released within the past year or so, I honestly don't think I would have given it the time of day. At least not until seeing the rave reviews it inevitably would have gotten by the end of part 1. In the end, there are two major reasons that got me to start watching the show: Gigguk's seasonal watchlist video, and the teaser trailer showing me who would be doing the music, Fujisawa Yoshiaki, the man responsible for Land of the Lustrous god-tier soundtrack. Coupled with the incredible musical storytelling provided by Ohara Yuko, it wouldn't take long to realize that with just the music alone, this series was and continues to be an incredible journey. One of the first unique aspects of Mushoku Tensei's music that you'll notice as a viewer is that its usage, particularly in the earlier parts of the story, is quite sparse, leaving us with more silent narrative scenes than we'd normally expect in an anime. The first piece of music heard in the series is actually 6 minutes into the first episode, quite late considering music's role in this sort of medium. This first instance of music occurs when Zenith heals Rudy, showing him that the world he has been reborn into is fundamentally different from his previous one. Keeping this in mind, very rarely is the music we receive thematic in the sense that it has a distinctive melodic hook or draw that calls attention to its meaning or association. This sets it apart from anime like The Disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya, which sparingly used music to incredible narrative effect, and also Western film, which tends to have a lot of non-thematic music to set an underlying tone for every scene. There are more important moments here and there that introduce us to stronger themes and pieces, usually regarding Rudy's understanding of the world and magic, but for the most part the first couple of episodes stay in this sort of strange, if not fitting, out-of-place atmosphere. Where this starts to change, however, is with Roxy's departure from the Grey Rat household, with music being used in a more standard anime manner to indicate Rudy's growth, mastery over magic, and his first step in overcoming the traumas of his past life. In that sense, the strange use of music is understandable, though it doesn't make these earlier scenes feel any less weird. In fairness, Roxy leaves at the end of the second episode, so this really isn't a long-lasting time frame, but it definitely struck me as odd and is something I still sort of question the purpose of if it was only going to be a narrative effect for less than 2 episodes. Again, it's understandable if it was being used to illustrate Rudy's own out-of-placeness in this new world, but it doesn't stop the overall atmosphere of these episodes from feeling strange. But that aside, actually hearing the music at play is a whole other conversation. From the eerie, chant-like vocalizations that signal the awakening and presence of magic, to the heartfelt piano moments that have the characters reflecting on their exploits, Fujisawa doesn't shy away from exploring different soundscapes to capture the various places and cultures within the world of the series. Starting us off, we have the second piece on the soundtrack, one which perfectly encapsulates multiple aspects of the basic elements that make up Mushoku Tensei and its world. From the first moment it begins, we're hit with a low buzzing drone from some Irish alien pipes, followed by tin whistles and a fiddle to strongly establish the Celtic vibe. This is probably one of the most common sounds used to establish European-inspired fantasy settings, as well as more generally wide-open nature-related settings, of which most of Mushoku Tensei's locations are, while something completely different like Yuducamp's campsites still feel fitting with this style of music despite taking place in modern-day Japan. The more interesting aspect is about 30 seconds in, when we get our first taste of the singing. Throughout Mushoku Tensei's soundtrack, there aren't many moments where we get what could best be described as choral singing. The voices here are always sort of rough and chant-like, used more as an atmospheric indicator of the medieval world Rudy has found himself in. At the same time, these voices are often present in moments where some great change is taking place, most often associated with the presence of new magic. For example, here we have the track that plays when Rudy first starts to get a grasp on the concept of magic as a child. Some atmospheric strings set the tone as the celesta plays in a minimalist melody, the notes coming in like water droplets for a temple-like sound. Already the vibe being created is foreign to the European-esque world Rudy finds himself in, lending even greater power to the mysterious workings of magic. A tempo change just past the halfway point has the strings running quickly beneath the voices chanting out their rising and falling melody. There aren't any apparent words being chanted, but this moment establishes these voices as something we can associate with the mysterious magical occurrences within this world. We can also hear the chanting in this track from the second half of part 1, accompanying the Dead End trio on their journey across the Demon Continent. The magic and fantastical elements of this part of the world are obvious enough from the basic existence of the races Rudy and Eris come across for the first time. From the gem embedded in Ruijerd's head as the last living spare, to any of the numerous beast folk they encounter, not to mention Roxy's village of telepaths. Magic and foreign elements are abundant, and the music acts as a sort of guide to help us experience the same sense of wonder and strangeness that Rudy and Eris experience here. But the chanting's role isn't simply to indicate this magic. As I mentioned before, this chanting is more generally used to indicate great change. And truly there are no greater changes for Rudy or any of the people he knew before than the teleportation incident that set the story in motion. Here we have one of the earliest moments of change for Rudy that, by great contrast, doesn't actually contain the chanting. Just having a quick look at the music, we can see that this piece consists of a string ensemble and piano, nothing particularly complex or unexpected for orchestral soundtracks, but also quite a telling one for this moment. This is the music that plays during Rudy's final exam with Roxy, in which he must summon a storm to prove his mastery over magic. For what is visually quite an intense scene on screen, coupled with Rudy's monologue masking most of the music, hearing this track on its own makes it seem as though it actually doesn't quite fit, and yet knowing the context of the scene tells us everything we need to know about why it matches anyway. As the one person Rudy respects most in this world, his desire to prove himself to Roxy in this moment is also his way of thanking her for all she has given him, in every sense of the manner. This has the music starting with a running piano line and a trill in the supporting violins, playing a simple F sus2 for a bright and hopeful sound. This is a fairly straightforward way to represent the magic building as Rudy begins, and it also shows the gratefulness and admiration he feels toward Roxy without building into something overly grandiose. As the cello soloist comes in, we're met with a hopeful rising melody in F mixolydian, as indicated by the flat 7 E flat. As a whole, Japanese music often utilizes the flat 6 and flat 7 as a means to make chord progressions that can loop forever without fully resolving so as to allow for an infinite amount of time to develop and flesh out ideas, often represented as some combination of the 3, 4, 5, and 6 chords. Thanks to the major mixolydian sound, however, this E flat to F whole tone rise gives the music a more upward lilt than the regular half step of the major mode would, allowing the music to take on a brighter sound within the context of jumping up to the B flat, creating a perfect fifth where a dissonant tritone would occur had this been a regular F major. Not long after, a violin solo also begins piercing through, creating a counter melody for the cellist while building upon the sense of magic growing within Rudy. What follows is a drastic change as the ensemble cuts out on an E flat 6-9, leaving us hanging for a resolution to the F, only to suddenly shift into a series of expanding chords: B flat, C7, F, followed by the same thing up a fourth, E flat, F7, B flat. Thanks to the previous usage of the E flat to establish our mixolydian sound, this jump up to it from the B flat sounds completely natural in our key, while simultaneously giving us a big hopeful rise to represent the magic bursting from Rudy as he summons the storm. This is where his magic is going to be put on full display as he manifests his powers for Roxy. We then get a short interlude with the piano outlining a B-flat minor 9 chord for an unexpectedly somber mood, dropping the bass D a half step to the D-flat. This darker tone can be seen as a brief reflection on Rudy's loneliness, knowing that this test marks not only his mastery over magic, but his separation from Roxy, as she will have nothing left to teach him. This is short-lived, however, as the D-flat falls down to a much brighter C sus and closes out on a triumphant rising C major as we move into the next section. Rudy was always conscious of the fact that his abilities were exceptional, and it would only be a short matter of time before he could reach or even surpass Roxy's level, at which point she would have no reason to stay in Buena Village as his teacher. Despite not wanting to part ways, ending on anything less than what his capabilities allow would be a disservice to Roxy, and so he pushes past his feelings of sadness as a sign of respect for her, shown as the music explodes into the final march-like section. As we circle around to another slight interlude, we're led into a bright B-flat major led by the strings, cued up by the previous bar's A major. This has the music feeling much more hopeful than the previous interlude, representing Rudy's gratitude as he comes to terms with his own powers and the inevitable parting with Roxy. The road from here will be different, but having been shown the village outside his home and the powers he has to offer to the world, he can only be glad for the opportunity to have met and worked with Roxy. There are a ton of other pieces to talk about, and many more that encapsulate many of the aspects that sets Mushoku Tensei apart from other series, but the last one for this video is something more standard across anime soundtracks, if only to prove why a piece like this is so effective. Here we have a piano solo, utilized in a few moments across the series, but most notably at the end of Season 1, after Rudy has been left on his own following both Rui Jaird's and Aer's departures. While the moment itself has a devastating effect on Rudy, the reflection from both of his companions as they venture along their separate paths shows the positive impact that their time spent together had, and that they have Rudy to thank for it. Film scores and soundtracks have standardized many instruments to mean certain things across the years, and anime is certainly not an exception to these standardizations. Fittingly for this case, the piano is the instrument most commonly associated with memories and recollection, something you can easily hear and connect in all sorts of soundtracks and scores. There isn't anything particularly special about the writing, aside from perhaps this key change from F major to D flat major, but in its simplicity, we can capture the feelings being conveyed within the reflections of the former Dead End members. A simple descending bass line and chords held for long periods of time in the melody give us a moment to pause and think, a chance to breathe after all the hardships the party has faced. Rui Jaird sees firsthand the effects of having done good work alongside his companions, with the reputation of the spared finally being reduced to little more than a way to keep children from being naughty. Similarly, Eris realizes that despite Rudy's misgivings, she was always reliant on him, and through the time they spent together, she was given the opportunity to grow not just as a warrior and adventurer, but a young woman, one who now has the resolve and temperament to carve her own path in life in spite of the downfall of her family. As we follow their sentimental recollections, the piano plays as if each note in the melody is another memory flashing before our eyes, coming in steady droplets as the emotions of Dead End's journey are reflected in the bass line, initially quite heavy but becoming lighter over time, showing the growth, trust, and affection each of them hold for one another. While most piano pieces we think of are used to look back on moments in a reflective, often positive outlook, it can also be used to opposite effect, as we can hear in earlier moments of the story as well, specifically when Rudy thinks back on the troubles of his past life. The dark, heavy chords mixed with the resonance of the instrument allow us to feel the burden placed on him, even if those memories have no relevance to the people he knows and interacts with in this world. How the listener interprets the exact way in which the notes relate to the story will differ, but the usage of the instrument itself, alongside the general feeling of the music, will always allow us to leave the scene with a feeling of reflectiveness. Mushoku Tensei's soundtrack is something special, and one that continues to provide the atmospheres necessary to capture the world in which it's set. While Fujisawa may not have been overtly innovative with his techniques, especially compared to something like his work on Land of the Lustrous, this more standard approach to music is more fitting with the fact that, despite how well written and fleshed out of a story Mushoku Tensei has, at the end of the day, it's still just another isekai story in an overly saturated market of isekai shows. Granted, it's also what many consider the grandfather of all modern isekai stories, but this use of standard techniques with the occasional chanting vocal or gamelan ensemble adds just the right amount amount of intrigue to show that Mushoku Tensei isn't only interesting and unique in its method of storytelling and world building through prose, it does so through the music that makes up the fundamental feeling of the world we have come to grow and love watching unfold on screen. This video has been a really long time coming, and honestly, I've just been putting it off for so long because I really wanted to have a solid grasp on the aspects of the music, which just luckily for me happened to line up with the first part of season 2 ending. Now, I didn't talk about any of the music from season 2 because the first half of the soundtrack doesn't actually come out for the next few days or weeks or so, and then the second half won't be coming out at all until the second half of season 2 is finished next year. And thankfully, despite what I thought was a bad direction choice for the new opening segment of season 2, there is still another Ohara Yuiko song that played as the ending, so maybe I'll talk about that in the meantime while we wait for that season 2 soundtrack to come out. But until that time potentially comes, thanks again for watching. Make sure to like the video and comment down below. And hey, if you want to support these videos and get access to things like the transcriptions that I do for all of my analytical videos, make sure to go over and support me on Patreon. Thanks as always for watching, and I will see you in the next one.